Hi, I'm Larry Tomczak, and I want to welcome you to a very unique, I trust, week in review. This is an urgent statement regarding President Trump and recent events and our current crisis. Stay with me. I am praying that God will awaken multitudes as a result of what's being shared here. And I'd like to begin by reading something to you that's called The Crisis. This is by Thomas Paine that inspired the early colonists. He said the following: "These are times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated." I invite you now to listen as I read to you a statement, and it's called, again, an urgent statement regarding President Trump, recent events, and our current crisis. Do you really understand what's happening to America? In my study, I have a large poster that I once presented to Dr. Elvita King, niece of Martin Luther King Jr., one of my heroes. He stated, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." After the infamous Watergate scandal, Billy Graham was asked about Richard Nixon. He said, quote, "I am still his friend. I have not forsaken him. I have met and prayed with him many times." Scripture says a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A British leader, Bryn Jones, once told me, "Pressure reveals the person. It also proves loyalty, which is only tested in adversity." As our president continues to face enormous challenges and never-ending hammering by politicians, press, platforms of social media, and even some high-profile Christian leaders, there is so much swirling around us that I venture to ask, do we really understand what's happening in America? It's time for clarity and courage. In the New Testament, it tells us, if the trumpet blows or makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare himself for the battle? Throughout history, a trumpet or bugle has been used in military situations to awaken troops and alert them to take designated action. As Christians who love God and our country, it's imperative that we know what's happening on our watch, so we can follow divine direction for ourselves, our families, and the future of America. What is happening in the spirit realm regarding our toxic and deeply disturbing situation unfolding on the heels of the chaotic and chilling 2020 season requires keen discernment. This is very serious, and we mustn't check out of the hotel because of fear, uncomfortableness, or weariness. We are engaged in a cosmic struggle between forces of good and evil. There are players on stage, but God wants us to look behind the scenes and see the spirits without bodies seeking to destroy the United States of America as a covenant-based constitutional republic founded upon Judeo-Christian principles, quote, "for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith." Quote, "For our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having done all to stand, stand." In this evil day, if we don't stand for something, then we will fall for anything. I'm persuaded that the majority of people aren't aware of what's happening currently. They are also being intimidated to remain silent, lest they be labeled racist, bigot, white supremacist, homophobic, intolerant, and ignorant if they identify with the dictatorial and, quote, deranged, as Nancy Pelosi calls him, Donald Trump. I'm blowing the trumpet so we have a crystal clear understanding of exactly of what's happening in this crisis. Double standard and duplicity. Recently, over 100,000 people, representing 74 million who voted to re-elect President Trump, assembled legitimately and peacefully in Washington, D.C. I covered the event with a veteran news analyst who was on site while I worked from home, exercising First Amendment rights and appealing for the further scrutiny of what countless millions believe was criminal activity, not shenanigans, in the presidential election. Masses, including myself listening from home, heard the president make a credible case, then encouraged supporters to, quote, remain peaceful, to, quote, walk down to the Capitol, quote, and, quote, cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, end quote. Having lived in the D.C. area for 24 years, I personally participated in over 20 similar peaceful pro-life marches. There have also been plenty of non-peaceful anti-war demonstrations, sit-ins in politicians' offices, Black Lives Matter, violent property-destroying protests, plus radical feminist events featuring someone like Madonna screaming, I can't say the words, expletives, and declaring, quote, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. The leftist-leaning media and Democrat politicians basically attach no significance to such incendiary remarks or others like these. Like what? Well, Barack Obama telling us to go to people and, quote, argue with them and get in their face. Or Attorney General Eric Holder saying, quote, when they go low, we kick them. That's what this new Democratic Party is about. Or Maxine Waters, Congresswoman from California, telling her crowd, if you see any Trump cabinet members in a restaurant or elsewhere, quote, push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. Or Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman from Massachusetts, Democrat, quote, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there is unrest in our lives. And unfortunately, there is plenty to go around. How about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi brushing aside Black Lives Matter, Antifa rioting, and looting, saying, quote, people will do what they do. Or Kamala Harris, encouraging contributions to post bail for violent Black Lives Matter rioters engaged in criminal law breaking. Trump haters' obsession. Amidst unbelievably lax security, a few hundred angry activists seized the D.C. moment for political theater and venting hostilities. The riotous behavior was in stark contrast to years of Trump rallies. Who were the instigators? Why were authorities totally unprepared? Prior to the event, why were offers for increased security declined? The Democrats and sympathetic media had a field day blaring giant-sized headlines all over America, very similar on, quote, Trump supporters storm the Capitol. Biden labeled them, quote, domestic terrorists, as Democrat leaders noticeably, muted during months of mayhem, destruction, injuries to police officers and people, plus the killing of a policeman, quickly launched what? Another impeachment initiative stating that President Trump, quote, incited an insurrection. This is an unfair fabrication. It's not based in fact, it's opinion and political prejudice. And while the president could have been quicker to repudiate the violence, like we all have, it's obvious the Democrat leaders want to humiliate the president and continue their 4-year obsession to remove him from office. Purging politicians and people. Opponents of Mr. Trump are now emboldened and intent on intimidating his supporters, removing his political allies. Things like, quote, we demand they resign, expel them from office for sedition. That's directed at Ted Cruz and others, and blocking all his media outlets. We are watching the, quote, cancel culture on steroids as many in the Washington establishment distance themselves from the president to hold on to their current careers and avoid being tarred and feathered. Somehow Biden and his new administration's flowery rhetoric calling for Americans to what? Unify and work together peacefully seems hollow. If they want to promote unity, how can they engage in such divisive conduct and stoke fires in 74 million citizens' hearts? What's unfolding should remind us of Nazi Germany tactics forcing Jews to wear what? Star of David patches during the Holocaust. Brand people. Give me examples. Hey, as you have probably heard, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, Apple, and others have launched a clampdown of communication from the president and those supporters who might be suspect. Senator Josh Hawley, who's a Republican from Missouri, had Simon & Schuster publishers cancel his book, The Tyranny of Big Tech. A Forbes official warned about hiring Christian White House spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany and stated that Forbes will assume everything your company or firm talks about is a lie. The anti-Trump Lincoln Project is building a database of Trump officials and staff for identification and appropriate persecution. Rewinding the tape and replaying history. Someone said that life is a mixture of amnesia and deja vu. We should make no apologies for rehearsing history. It's not by accident that God required Israel to yearly rehearse significant events in their journey. A little over 4 years ago, a rough and tumble Donald Trump emerged on the political scene. I was one of 1,000 senior leaders invited to New York to listen to him and discern if he was for real. Sitting behind Franklin Graham and Dr. James Dobson, I was honored to be in attendance, and I took seriously my assignment along with the assembled men and women of God. That day and up till the present, I know Donald Trump is not a typical politician, but a unique, flawed street fighter who loves America, the opportunities it has afforded him and his family, and he believed he had to run to stop our decline. He's an outlier who I believe was providentially provided in answer to prayer. At a pivotal time, with our nation at a crossroads, a champion seemingly emerged out of nowhere to systematically vanquish establishment Republicans, upset heavily favored media darling Hillary Clinton, and rally patriotic, God-fearing, traditional Americans that our best days were not behind us, but we had a divine destiny we needed to reclaim. The opposition party was careening off course from its traditional ideals and embracing a radical left-wing socialist agenda. Donald Trump was fearless in exposing the fakery of their news and narrative, seducing the unsuspecting. He used his business acumen to turn around our economy and unashamedly called out other nations taking advantage of us. He made promises and he kept them, initiated bold initiatives to better the lives of veterans and minorities, cut regulations to make us energy independent for the first time in history, folks, and terminated wasteful spending and bogus deals, and unashamedly stood for the sanctity of life and honored our historic relationship with the nation of Israel. The grassroots MAGA, that's Make America Great movement, is real, remains strong, and Mr. Trump is a major spokesman. The radical leftist, Marxist, socialist activists know we in the church and culture must be silenced and rendered ineffective to advance their progressive agenda. We collectively are, quote, salt that must not lose our saltiness to prevent decay, or will be, quote, good for nothing but to be thrown out and to be trampled underfoot by men, as Jesus warned. Besides, the destructive Democrat economic agenda They have an anti-God, Marxist, spiritual agenda to replace our Judeo-Christian moral foundations. Examples? They say the life of an unborn child is simply a choice, but God says human beings are created in His image and have the right to life. They say marriage is an arrangement that embraces homosexuality and lesbianism, but God says marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman. They say people can choose whatever gender they feel, but God says He created us from the beginning male and female. They say they'll mandate churches and schools teach according to the LGBTQ agenda, labeling hate speech, anything contrary, but God says we train our children in righteousness. Here's the deal. I've shared from my heart and over 50 years in ministry what I believe to be an overview of what's really happening in America, and it requires a courageous response. Now is not the time to distance ourselves from our President Donald Trump, for he has withstood horrendous opposition and with all his flaws remained rock solid in upholding the values that make America great for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. I beseech you to pray for him and not abandon him in his hour of need.